The store wasn't too bad during the day. I'd been there a bunch of times with my mom to grab snacks, so it felt normal enough. But at night, totally different. There's something weird about fluorescent lights when it's dark outside. They make everything look fake, like you're in one of those crime shows, and someone's about to get interrogated. It was my first night working the late shift. The manager, Sheila, spent maybe 10 minutes showing me how to scan stuff and count the cash. Then she handed me the keys and took off. "It's pretty dead after 10, she said, which I guess was supposed to be reassuring. It wasn't. The first hour went by fine. A couple of guys came in, grabbed some energy drinks, and left without saying anything. I stocked a few shelves and tried not to think about how quiet it was. There's no music or anything, just this low buzzing from the lights. Around 11:30, I started noticing something weird. The clock on the register would tick forward a few seconds, then jump back. At first, I thought it was just me zoning out, but then it kept happening. I pulled out my phone to check the time, but the screen wouldn't load. It just stayed blank. I turned it off and back on, but the same thing happened. I tried to shake it off. Maybe the store just had crappy Wi-Fi or something. That's when I noticed the guy on the cameras. He was tall and wearing a hoodie, with his hands shoved in his pockets. He was standing in one of the aisles, but he wasn't moving. Just standing there, like he couldn't decide what to grab. I waited a minute, then looked again. He was still in the exact same spot. I leaned out from behind the counter to see if I could spot him, but the aisle was empty. I figured he must have walked out without me noticing. When I looked back at the cameras, though, he was gone. I told myself it was no big deal. People act weird all the time, especially late at night. But the quiet started getting to me. I kept glancing at the cameras, hoping for anything normal. Someone grabbing chips, paying, leaving. But the store stayed empty. About 20 minutes later, I heard it. A soft clink from one of the aisles, like a jar tipping over. I froze for a second, then told myself to stop being dramatic. Stuff falls off shelves all the time, right? I grabbed the little broom from behind the counter and went to check it out. Nothing. The aisle looked fine. I even checked the floor to see if something had rolled under the shelf, but it was spotless. That's when I noticed the footsteps. Faint, like someone walking real slow, but definitely there. They were coming from one aisle over. "Hello?" My voice cracked, which made me feel stupid. No answer. I took a deep breath and stepped around the corner. Empty. The footsteps stopped too. I stood there for a minute, holding the broom like it was going to protect me or something, but everything was quiet again. When I went back to the counter, I saw the hoodie guy on the cameras again. This time, he wasn't in the aisles. He was standing right by the glass doors at the front of the store, just staring inside. His face was tilted down, so the hoodie's shadow covered it, but I could tell he was looking straight at me. I should have gone out there and told him to leave, but something about the way he was standing made me feel sick, like my body knew something my brain didn't. I glanced at the door. Nothing. Just the parking lot and the streetlights outside. When I looked back at the cameras, he was gone. I thought about calling Sheila, but what was I even going to say? Hey, some guy's creeping me out on the cameras, but not in real life. She'd probably just laugh and tell me to grow up. So I tried to focus on restocking the candy near the counter, keeping one eye on the monitors. At some point, I noticed the clock again. It was stuck at 11:53. I stared at it, waiting for it to tick forward. Nothing. My phone still wasn't working either. No texts, no internet, nothing. I had no clue how much time had passed. It could have been 5 minutes or an hour. Then the doors opened. It wasn't the hoodie guy, though. It was a woman, older, maybe in her 50s, wearing one of those long coats with a bunch of buttons. She didn't look at me when she came in. just walked straight to the back of the store and started pacing up and down the refrigerated section. I tried to relax. She was probably just some night owl looking for ice cream or whatever. After a few minutes, I noticed she wasn't actually opening the coolers. She'd stop in front of one, stare at the glass for a bit, then move to the next, over and over, like she was waiting for something to appear. I wanted to ask if she needed help, but my throat felt dry, like I'd swallowed sand. Finally, she turned toward me, and I froze. Her face, I don't know how to explain it, like if someone tried to draw a person from memory and got all the pieces in the wrong place. She smiled, but it wasn't a real smile, just her teeth showing, too wide and flat, like she was baring them instead of grinning. "You don't have what I'm looking for," she said. Her voice sounded weirdly calm, like she already knew the answer. Then she turned around and walked out, leaving the door open behind her. When I got up to close it, I glanced outside. She wasn't in the parking lot. There wasn't even a car. I shut the door and locked it. I don't even know why. It wasn't like she was coming back, but the air felt heavier after she left, like the whole store was holding its breath. I went back to the counter and stared at the cameras. Everything was quiet for a while. Too quiet. No, scratch that. It was just quiet. Nothing weird. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, just late-night paranoia. But then, out of nowhere, all the screens on the cameras glitched at once. Not static, just this blur, like the lens was smeared with grease. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then went back to normal. Except it wasn't normal. The aisles were empty, but now the shelves were completely bare. No chips, no drinks, not even gum. I looked out at the store, and everything was still there, fully stocked, nothing touched. But on the monitors, the place looked like it had been cleaned out. Just rows and rows of empty metal racks. I leaned closer to the screens, squinting at one of them. That's when I saw it. Someone standing at the far end of the aisle, right where the shelves ended. They were facing the camera, but didn't move. It wasn't the hoodie guy or the woman. It wasn't even really a person. It was tall and thin, and its body bent at weird angles, like it didn't know how to stand properly. The longer I looked, the more it didn't make sense. Its face, if it even had one, was just this blank smear, like someone had erased it. I looked up at the actual aisle, and nothing was there. When I looked back at the cameras, it was closer. I wanted to leave. I even grabbed my bag and walked toward the door, but my legs wouldn't move right. It felt like I was wading through water, every step slower than the last. When I finally got to the door, I pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. I fumbled for the keys, but when I turned to grab them off the counter, the cameras glitched again. This time, when the screens came back, there were more of them. Dozens, filling the aisles. Some were short, hunched over, crawling between shelves. Others were tall, towering over the racks, their limbs stretching in ways that didn't make sense. All of them were facing the cameras, and all of them were getting closer. I didn't know what to do. My keys were right there on the counter, but I couldn't make myself go back. The camera screens were showing them, whatever they were, and I didn't want to look too long, afraid they'd notice me, as if they hadn't already. The lights started flickering. It wasn't the usual buzz. This was worse. The bulbs flashed so bright they burned white, then dimmed so low it felt like the store was shutting its eyes. I was stuck by the door, my back pressed against it like that would help. The worst part? I could hear them now. Not footsteps or anything like that. It was this wet, dragging noise, like someone pulling something heavy across the floor. It echoed through the store, louder than it should have been, like the aisles were amplifying it. I kept telling myself It was my imagination, but the sound didn't stop. It kept getting closer. When I finally forced myself to move, I grabbed the keys and ducked behind the counter. I crouched down, hugging my knees, and tried not to breathe too loud. I had no plan. The front door wouldn't open. My phone was useless, and I sure as hell wasn't going into the back room. The dragging sound was right in front of me now. I could hear it on the other side of the counter, and something else too. This low, raspy breathing, like it was struggling to pull in air. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. I peeked around the edge of the counter, just enough to see. It was one of them. Not tall, not hunched, just this shape, crouched low to the ground. Its arms were way too long, dragging behind it as it moved. Its skin, or whatever it had, looked shiny and wet, and its head tilted back like it was sniffing the air. There was no face, just smooth, pale skin stretched too tight, like it had been wrapped in plastic. It froze. I don't know how I knew, but I could tell it was listening. I pressed my hand over my mouth, holding my breath so hard my chest hurt. The thing stood there for what felt like forever, and then it started to rise, slowly, like it was unfolding itself. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I scrambled out from behind the counter and ran for the back room. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I kept moving, slamming the door behind me and locking it. The storage room was dark, and I couldn't find the light switch, so I just stood there in the pitch black, trying to get my breathing under control. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The air in the storage room was stale, like the place hadn't been opened in years, even though I'd just been in there earlier to grab stock. My hand was still on the door handle, gripping it so tight my fingers were cramping, but I didn't dare let go. Something shifted in the dark. Just a small sound, quiet, like a shoe scraping against the floor, but it was enough. I wasn't alone. I thought about turning on the flashlight on my phone, but what if it made noise? Or worse, what if the light showed me something I didn't want to see? My stomach twisted, and my mind raced, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. And then I heard it again, closer this time. A slow, deliberate step. Whatever it wasn't in a hurry. "Who's there?" I said before I could stop myself. My voice came out shaky, like a little kid scared of the dark. No answer. Just another step. I backed away from the door, feeling my way along the wall. My fingers brushed against shelves, boxes, something cold and metal. I kept moving until my back hit the far corner. The room wasn't big, but it felt endless in the dark. The footsteps stopped, and for a second, everything was silent. Then I heard it breathing. Not like the thing from the counter. It wasn't raspy or strained. It was slow and steady, like someone who knew exactly where I was and didn't care if I knew they were there too. I fumbled in my pocket and pulled out my keys. I didn't even know what I was planning to do with them. Throw them? Stab something? The metal jingled in my hand, and the breathing stopped. Something slammed into the shelves next to me, hard enough to knock over a box. I flinched, dropping the keys, and they clattered loudly to the floor. Whatever was in the room let out this low, guttural noise, like a growl, but too deep, too unnatural. I crouched down, my hands scrambling to grab the keys, when I felt it. Warm air, right by my ear, like someone leaning in close to whisper, "You shouldn't be here." I bolted for the door. I didn't even care if it was locked. I just ran straight into it, slamming my shoulder against the metal. It flew open, and I stumbled back into the store. Except it wasn't the store anymore. The store was gone, or it looked gone anyway. The walls, the shelves, even the counter. It was all just empty space, not dark, not bright, just this weird gray nothingness that stretched out in every direction. The door I'd just come through slammed shut behind me, and when I turned around, it wasn't there anymore. Just more of that endless, flat gray. I didn't know what to do. I tried walking, but every step felt like I wasn't going anywhere, even though I could feel the ground under me. I kept looking down at my shoes, expecting them to vanish or sink into whatever this was, but they didn't. It was just me, standing there, totally alone. At least, that's what I thought. It started out faint, way off in the distance. A sound, like someone whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it wasn't random. It had a rhythm, like a chant or a prayer. I turned toward the sound, or at least I thought I did, but everything looked the same. The whispers got louder, and now it wasn't just one voice. It was a whole group, all overlapping, getting closer. I tried to yell, to tell them to stop, or ask who they were, but my voice came out flat and weak, like it didn't belong here. And then I saw them. They weren't walking. They were just there. Dozens of them, maybe more, all standing perfectly still. Some were close, some far away, but they all faced me. Their shapes blurred at the edges, like they weren't fully formed yet. I couldn't see faces, but I could feel their eyes, hundreds of them, watching me like I was something they were waiting for. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Every muscle in my body felt locked, like I'd been frozen in place. The whispers were everywhere now, surrounding me, digging into my head like they were coming from inside it. They weren't words, not really, just sounds that made me feel wrong, like I wasn't supposed to hear them. One of them stepped forward. It was taller than the others, and its body stretched in a way that didn't make sense, like a shadow being pulled across a wall. Its face, or where its face should have been, tilted toward me, and I swear I felt it smile, even though there was nothing there. "You shouldn't have left," it said. The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the whispers like a knife. It sounded familiar too. My voice, but not exactly. It was like hearing myself on a recording, warped and wrong. I tried to say something, to ask what it wanted, but before I could, everything changed again. Before I could do anything, move, scream, whatever, it changed again. The gray nothingness shifted, snapping into focus so fast it made me dizzy. I wasn't in the store, and I wasn't in that empty space anymore. I was somewhere worse. It looked like the store, kind of, but wrong. The shelves were still there, but they were twisted and leaning, covered in thick, dark stains. The lights above flickered, buzzing so loud it hurt my ears. Everything smelled burnt, like plastic melting in a microwave. The whispering had stopped. It was dead silent now, except for the buzzing. I stood there, trying to figure out where I was or how I got there, when I heard it. A scraping sound, coming from behind one of the aisles. Slow and steady, like something being dragged across the floor. I wanted to run, but I felt trapped, like the air was pushing me down. The scraping got louder, and then I saw it, or part of it. A hand, just the fingers, long and thin, curling around the edge of the aisle. They twitched, like they were testing the air, then gripped the metal shelf so hard it groaned. Whatever it was, pulled itself into view. It didn't look like the thing from the storage room, but it wasn't human either. Its body was hunched, its skin pale and stretched so tight I could see every bone underneath. It had no eyes, just deep hollows where they should have been. Its head turned toward me, like it could still see, and I swear I felt it lock onto me. I backed up, my feet sliding on the sticky floor, but it started moving. Not fast, slow, deliberate steps, its fingers trailing along the shelves like it was enjoying the sound they made. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, which turned out to be a can of soda, and threw it as hard as I could. The can hit its shoulder, and for a second, it stopped. I thought maybe it worked. Maybe I could get away. But then it twisted its head, bending its neck at this horrible angle. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt it smile. Not with its mouth. It didn't have one. But I knew it was smiling at me. The buzzing grew louder, almost like laughing, and then the thing started running. I ran without thinking. My shoes slipped on the floor, and I almost went down, but I caught myself on a shelf and kept moving. The thing's footsteps were loud now, like it wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. Every step sounded heavy, wet, like it was slamming into the floor and dragging itself forward. I headed for the front doors, even though I knew they wouldn't open. What else could I do? I slammed into them, throwing my shoulder against the glass, but they didn't budge. The open 24 hours sign was still lit, mocking me. I hit the door again, harder this time, until I felt something shift behind me. It wasn't running anymore. The sound had stopped completely. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to see it, but I couldn't help myself. When I looked back, it was standing in the middle of the aisle, bent over, like it was too tall to stand upright. It didn't move. Its empty face stared straight at me, and it raised one hand, pointing at me with those long, bony fingers. I don't know why that made it worse, but it did. My chest felt like it was going to explode. I grabbed a mop leaning against the wall and held it in front of me, like it was actually going to help. The thing tilted its head, like it was confused, and took one step forward. "Stay back," I yelled. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. The thing froze, its head twitching slightly, like it was listening. Then it started laughing. The sound wasn't right. It was low and garbled, like a recording being played underwater. It didn't stop either. It just kept laughing, louder and louder, until I wanted to cover my ears. I swung the mop, hitting the shelf next to me. A few cans fell and rolled across the floor. The thing stopped laughing, its head snapping toward the sound. Then it turned back to me and took another step. "Please," I whispered, "just leave me alone." It didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. Its fingers dragged along the glass door as it moved closer, leaving smears behind. I backed up until I hit the counter, my heart pounding so hard I thought I was going to pass out. I felt around behind me, my hands brushing against the register, the scanner, the keys. I grabbed them and hurled them at the thing. They hit its chest and bounced off, clattering to the floor. It didn't react. It just kept coming. I don't know what happened next. 1 second, it was right in front of me, and the next, the lights exploded. Not flickering, exploded. Glass rained down from the ceiling, and I threw my arms over my head. When I looked up again, the store was dark, and I was alone. I stayed frozen, waiting for something to happen. My ears were ringing from the lights shattering, but I didn't hear anything else. No footsteps, no laughing, nothing. Just silence. I wanted to believe it was over, that the thing was gone, but I didn't trust it. Not after everything I'd seen. The store was pitch black now, except for the faint glow of the open 24 hours sign. It lit up just enough for me to see shapes, the outlines of shelves and the counter, but that was it. I felt like if I moved, something would notice. My phone. I remembered it was in my pocket. It was useless for calling anyone, but maybe I could use it as a flashlight. Slowly, I pulled it out and pressed the button. The screen lit up, way too bright for the dark room, and I flinched, expecting something to come rushing out of the shadows. Nothing did. I swiped to the flashlight app and pointed it in front of me. The beam cut through the dark, bouncing off the shelves and walls. Everything looked the same as before, except emptier. The The shelves weren't just twisted and stained anymore. They were broken, sagging like they were holding up too much weight. I took a step forward, the beam shaking in my hand. My shoes crunched on the broken glass from the lights, the sound way too loud in the silence. I turned the light toward the floor, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. Not normal ones. These were huge, with long clawed toes, and they glistened like they'd been left in something wet. They led away from where I'd been standing and disappeared into the far end of the store. I knew I should just stay put, but I couldn't. I had to see where they went. The beam of the flashlight wobbled as I moved, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting the thing to be right behind me. But the store stayed quiet. When I reached the end of the footprints, I realized they weren't going to the back room. They stopped in front of the freezer section. One of the glass doors was open, swinging slightly, like someone had just been there. I shined the light inside, expecting to see something horrible, but it was empty. Then I noticed the reflection. In the glass of the next freezer door, I saw it standing behind me, its head tilted, its body stretched and bent, and its long fingers reaching out for my shoulder. I didn't think. I just ran. The flashlight slipped out of my hand, clattering to the floor, and I sprinted back toward the front of the store. My heart was hammering so hard, it felt like it was in my throat, but all I could think was to get away. Behind me, I heard it moving, quick, uneven steps, like it was lurching after me. I reached the counter and grabbed for anything I could use to defend myself. My hands found the metal pole of the mop I'd dropped earlier, and I spun around, swinging it as hard as I could. It didn't hit anything. The thing wasn't there. The store was empty again, silent except for my breathing. I stood there, holding the mop, shaking so bad I could barely keep my grip. My eyes darted around the room, scanning every aisle, every shadow, but I didn't see it. And then the lights came back on. They didn't flicker. They didn't buzz. They just snapped back, bright and blinding, like nothing had ever been wrong. The store looked normal again, except for the broken glass and the mess I'd made knocking stuff over. Even the shelves were back in place, fully stocked. It was like I'd imagined everything, but I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. My phone was still on the floor where I'd dropped it, and the freezer door was still swinging, slowly, back and forth. I took a shaky step forward, then another, trying to convince myself it was safe. Maybe I'd finally scared it off. Maybe whatever it was had left. And then I heard it again. A voice, calm and steady, coming from the intercom above me. "You can't leave." My stomach dropped. I looked around, trying to find where the voice was coming from. But it wasn't the thing talking. It was me. My own voice, repeating the same phrase over and over again, calm but distorted, like a bad recording. "You can't leave. You can't leave. You can't leave." I dropped the mop and ran for the door, slamming my fists against the glass. "Let me out," I screamed, but it was no use. The door didn't move, and the voice kept playing, getting louder, overlapping itself until it was all I could hear. Then it stopped. I turned around, my back pressed against the door, and saw it. The thing was standing at the end of the aisle closest to me, its head tilted, its body still twitching slightly, like it didn't quite know how to stay still. It didn't move toward me this time. It just stood there, watching, waiting. Behind it, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a dark opening in the wall, where there definitely hadn't been one before. It looked like a doorway, but there was no frame, no light, just pitch black. The thing raised one hand, pointing toward it, and I knew, without it saying anything, that it wanted me to go inside. I didn't move. There was no way I was going into that dark opening. Whatever was in there, whatever it wanted, it couldn't be good. but the thing didn't care what I wanted. It lowered its arm and took a step forward, slow and jerky, like its joints didn't work right. I pressed myself harder against the door, my fingers scrambling for the lock, for anything, but I already knew it wasn't going to open. The thing stopped a few feet away, its head tilting again. It didn't speak. It just pointed at the doorway behind it, like it was giving me one last chance. My whole body was shaking, my chest tight with panic, but I couldn't look away. It was like my feet were moving on their own, dragging me toward the black opening. I tried to stop myself, to turn and run, but my body didn't listen. I kept walking, my shoes crunching on the broken glass, until I was standing right in front of the doorway. It was taller than I thought, towering over me, its edges sharp and unnatural, like someone had ripped a hole in the air. I peered inside, but there was nothing. Just blackness so deep, it felt like it was swallowing the light from the store behind me. I turned back to look at the thing, hoping it would stop me, but it was gone. The store was empty again, quiet and still, like nothing had happened. I wanted to believe it was over, that I could just walk away and pretend none of this ever happened. But then I felt it, cold air, rushing out of the doorway like a breath, and underneath it, something else, a sound. It was my name, over and over, whispered so softly I almost didn't hear it. I didn't want to go in, but I couldn't stop myself. My feet moved forward, stepping into the black. The cold swallowed me instantly, wrapping around me like ice water. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't see anything, couldn't feel anything, except the cold and the sound of my name, growing louder and louder. And then, all at once, it stopped. I woke up on the floor of the store. The lights were on, the shelves were neat, and the clock on the register said 6:01 a.m. Sheila was standing over me, her arms crossed. "What the hell happened here?" she asked, motioning to the mess. I couldn't answer. I just stared at her, my mouth dry, my head pounding. She didn't wait for an explanation. "Clean this up before the next shift," she said, then walked out like nothing was wrong. I wanted to tell her, to make her understand, but the words wouldn't come. I stayed on the floor for a long time, staring at the freezer section. The door wasn't swinging anymore. The glass wasn't even cracked. But there, at the far end of the aisle, just for a second, I thought I saw it. The thing, watching me.